And the epigraph of the book is step and fit, don't look back, something may be gaining on you.
Hmm.
And she says at another point, the unexamined life is the only life worth living. And it's a denial of Socrates. And she said, well, look what happened to Socrates.
Right.
Looking backward didn't do him any good.
Welcome to our latest episode of Book Reporter Talks To, where our guest today is Susan Rieger, and we are going to be talking about her latest novel, Like Mother, which is a Book Reporter Bets On selection. I absolutely love this book. I'm talking to Susan before the book's release, so we don't have our book reporter review yet. So I'm going to share some praise from other sources. Anna Napolitano, the author of Hello, Beautiful, said it's an enthralling novel about three generations of strong-willed, well, to say strong-willed women, unknowingly shaped by the secrets buried in their family's past. And we have, she also says, what a delight. Like Mother is sharp, funny, and witty. I like that. Ramon Alam, author of Leave the World Behind, says, Like Mother is a rare thing, a sprawling family saga, briskly told. Susan Rieger covers so much with the lightest of touches and a welcome and often surprising sense of humor. It's all there. With that, welcome, Susan. So nice to have you here.
So nice to be with you.
So let's start by you giving us an overview, which I know this is going to be tough to do, of Like Mother.
I, I practice regularly. The beating heart of the book is Lila Pereira, who's an editor at a major Washington, D.C. Newspaper. And as she herself will tell you, she is unfit to be a mother.
Mhm.
Her own mother died when she was two and disappeared when she was two, and her father was abusive.
Mhm.
So she solved the problem of raising children by marrying the loveliest man in the world, who turns out to be a fabulous father. The pulse of the book I think of as Grace, her youngest daughter,
Mhm.
who wants more of her mother's attention and can't get it. Lila works pretty much around the clock on big cases. And so when she's 30, she publishes a book about her family, and it winds up hurting people and does nothing to assuage her own hurt.
Mhm.
So I guess the underlying drama is that will Grace grow up and come to grips with who her mother was? But there's all kinds of other people in the book too. It's a book about marriages. It's a book about friendships.
Mhm.
There's a wonderful grandmother in it. I'm a grandmother myself, and I become very partial to grandmothers. Friendship plays a very major part in this. Grace has a wonderful friend, and work, and the importance of work to women's
Mhm.
lives.
Yeah. I feel like the story reminds me of one of those Russian nesting dolls where one doll rests inside the other. And did you always know you're going to look at three generations? Like when you sat down, did you say, this is what I'm going to do? Or did it evolve as time went on?
This book is the book I've had that sort of the least idea about what was going on. I started with the first sentence of the book, and I knew Lila was going to be a newspaper editor. And then as I wrote, I knew she had children and a husband. And as I wrote, I realized she had a difficult relationship with her youngest daughter. And I sort of went along like that. One of the things I do is I don't tell a story chronologically.
Mhm.
I go back and forth in time. I have a theory, though my agents sometimes think it's an after the fact theory, that whenever we meet somebody new, we don't start with the day we're born.
Mhm. Right.
We start with what happened yesterday, and
Mhm.
then we may then go back to something 5 years ago, and then we may go forward to plans. And so I like to think I tell novels as we tell our friends about ourselves.
Mhm. So we talk
And
about
that,
our lives. We talk about our lives. We don't say, I was born on December 7th. You don't do it like that. You come in where you're coming in. And then how you tell the story of your life depends on who you're talking to and
right.
what you're going to share or not share.
And also, I also follow connections. So if I'm talking about one thing, it seems to lead into an earlier memory. in it goes.
Yeah, right.
But no, I never know exactly where I'm going, and I didn't know what I was going to do about Zelda.
Okay, without that Zelda.
They're
So was one of the time periods the easiest to write and which was the most challenging?
of the three parts, you mean?
Yeah, the three parts.
The last one was the most challenging
Hmm.
because I had thought about it the least. It was the characters were undeveloped in the same way that they were in one and two. And one and two were Lila is very vivid.
Yes.
Grace will be vivid at some when she gets a little older,
Right.
but she's already pretty much in your face. And but the last part wasn't, and you don't want your ending to
Hmm.
peter out. You just
Hmm.
don't. So that was the hardest one to do. And my husband, who's a writer, kept on saying, you know, there are certain rules in writing about mysteries. That's all I'll say. I
That's
don't
all
want
you'll
to reveal
say,
what
right?
happened. So,
And there is a mystery element to the novel as the reader tries to figure out what really happened to this family, what really happened. Was there something that drove you to include like this mystery of what happened? Did you have someone tell you a story once about their background or something that, or drew this to you, or it was,
well, my family has mysteries. I think every family has some mysteries. And like all children, I kept it when I find out about them. But when my grandfather died, my grandfather was a major labor leader. He led the Lawrence strike of 1912. And when he died in the New York Times and had a couple of columns. And we were incredibly proud.
Mhm.
And so we're reading, and I'm 11 at the time, and my older sister is 14, and my younger sister is 7. And we're reading along down this, and we get to second last paragraph, and he said he is survived by his widow, Carolina Giovannitti, and his 3 children, my uncle first, my mother, Roma Giovannitti, and Vera Kalnin. And we say, who's Vera?
That typo?
Who's Vera? And my mother says she was her father's daughter from a first marriage. And she said Vera was always mean to her and her brother. And so they just ceased being friends and having anything to do with it.
Wow.
She had seen Vera at the funeral, which had happened a few days before, but never, and we were never in touch with her. And it clearly was a painful moment for her. And
Yeah.
my mother is not expressive. My mother is a forward-thinking person,
Hmm.
not unlike Lila in
Not
certain.
like Lila, I was going to
But
say.
we were never hit. My mother was in many ways devoted to her children and certainly fond of them. I mean, but uh, so I think that I have always saw something like that, and how families handle secrets, I think is
Hmm.
so interesting. People do it very differently,
Hmm.
you know. I mean,
And, and
I found out my grandfather was alcoholic when I was probably 40, and things like that.
well, I had a reunion with my cousins here last year. My dad is now the last surviving. He's 95. And the cousins are sitting at the table telling a story about my grandmother used to go, there were 8 children, and she'd rotate every eighth Sunday. She'd come to your house, which would give the daughter-in-law like a heart attack that she was coming. And meanwhile, there was only one boy in the family. There were 7 boys and one girl. Okay. So the one girl. And when they went to her house, that cousin says, oh, it was so much fun. We made pasta. And we're looking like it was a completely different experience for him than what we had. And I
Right.
said, isn't that interesting? Like he looked forward to the visit because this is what they were going to do. And meanwhile, my grandmother would sit on the couch with her pocketbook like this, like ready to go home. She'd go in and eat dinner. She'd sit like this. She goes, and now I can go home. So it was like an obligation on both sides. I was thinking this as the book was like evolving. It's like, how much did I really know about this woman? You know?
Right. That's a wonderful story
It's
too. I
like,
mean, it's the kind of story a writer might steal.
yeah, you just sit in a room and you're like, wait a second, you had what experience? And it was really, really fun. So Lila's this very high-powered journalist. And what drew that to you to have that be her career? Like, because she's boots on the ground, every story. I mean, lunch is 45 minutes and she's out, you know?
I always thought I would be a journalist, but I wound up not. I wound up going to law school instead when I got out of college, and I thought women were just going to law school at that time, and I was sort of very much wound up in the women's movement and the civil rights movement, and I thought these were things I wanted to do. but I was married when I went to law school. I got married quite young. I was out a few years between college and law school. And shortly after I graduated, a year after I graduated, I had a baby, which sort of made my career completely different. And I decided I would teach.
Hmm.
So, but when I was teaching at various places, I started writing op-ed type pieces about the law,
Hmm.
and I started doing that. And out of the teaching in those, my first book came. But many years later, I didn't start writing my first book until I was in my early 50s.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, I had done a project when I was teaching law at Brooklyn Law School about making a moot court docket, and you had to make up the case and see how the kids would argue it. And it was so much fun. But the other people who had to do it just hated it. And
Right.
I just thought, oh. And so when I was like in my eighth year at Yale, and I knew the job pretty well, and I thought I need to be doing something else. So I started writing the divorce papers. Um, so I think writing has always been a part of my life. My husband actually is a journalist, a critic, uh, but also a nonfiction writer. And my grandfather was a writer, and my uncle was a writer, and my daughter is a writer. My ex-husband is. I mean,
You're
writing,
surrounded.
right, seems to be the family. Though I came to it very, very late, and so the newspaper thing is, I've always loved newspapers. We
Hmm.
subscribe to the Guardian, we subscribe to the New York Times, we we subscribe to the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, on and off, and I love magazines too. I love journalism, and I think journalists are the the thin blue line.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Where we
and
are. You know, it's interesting. I started in newspapers. My dad worked for a newspaper. He was the advertising director of a newspaper, advertising manager of one of the Newhouse papers. And
ah,
I worked there for 5 summers and then went to Condé Nast and spent 17 years in magazines.
which
And
one
I
were you
know
with?
I know what you mean about loving the print. I mean, we used to get the papers from all over the country, and I
Yeah,
would be reading the papers from all over the country because I want to know what they were saying in Portland. I wanted wherever St. Louis, and I wanted to see what people were saying around the country because it wasn't always the same even then.
yeah,
And also, when we were in the magazine business, it's not what it was. It was a golden moment that Graydon Carter says ended in 2006. I think he's about a decade off. I think it was more like 1996, which is about when I left. Because as soon as the internet came, the whole thing shifted.
yeah.
And now you're reading pieces that I feel are maybe under edited, maybe not perspective completely. It's just a different, like I can't picture picking up a magazine and reading quite the same way anymore, simply because the medium's changed so much.
Yeah. I read so much online.
Yes.
It pops up in my email. I click on it. I go to the Atlantic or I go to the New Yorker,
Yep.
and I read it that way. And then, of course, because it's evanescent on the screen, it's evanescent in my mind.
True.
Reading print is sticks with you much more than reading online.
Do you know, I always remember there's a story that was in Red Book years ago, years and years, I mean, decades ago. And it was about a woman whose husband had cancer and he wanted her to go take pictures every day because don't just stay with me, have a life, like one of those things. And she became a photographer later on. That story, if I could find that story again, it is probably 50 years since I've read that story. Like, it was something ridiculous, yet it stayed in my brain. And I don't know if this online stories stay quite the same way.
No, I don't either. Um,
Mm-mm.
no, and books certainly don't. Oftentimes, if I read a book and I put it down for a week, I have to start over.
Yeah. Like,
I mean, I put down if I don't go into it on my computer, and if
right.
I'm reading it in print, it's more likely to stick.
Yeah.
Um,
And
but it's
memoirs is something I can listen to, but lots of times I can't listen to a novel because sometimes I know the person's life enough that I'm going to be able to fill in the blanks of what's
yeah,
going on. I think I should really put that in the newsletter this week. I think that's the reason they work, is because you've already got the character formed in your brain.
well,
Whereas
that's
So I love this line that Lila mentions from The Secret Garden, which is this book she loves. The two worst things that can happen to a child is to never have his own way or to always have it. And in times in her life, she has either, but not both. And let's talk about that because she either has everything she wants or nothing, and she starts with nothing.
She starts with nothing. Yes, it's a very rough childhood, and temperamentally, she's one of three children. Temperamentally, she does all right with it, but it was a terrible, terrible childhood. One of the things she says is she never had any new clothes. She got
Yes.
all her clothes at Goodwill except underpants. She refused to wear anybody else's underpants. And her not being raised by a grandmother who wasn't warm and who wasn't violent. She would sometimes, cuff her on the head, but that was the extent of it. But the father was a brute,
Mhm.
and that was not getting her own way. And the day she left for college,
That was it.
that was it. That was it. Never spoke to her father again. Never. That he
And
was
it's either so she had what she didn't have what she wanted, and then she got what she wanted. And when she got what she wanted, she went in full bore.
right.
And I like that she has her girls call her Lila, not mom. And I thought it might be because she never knew her mother, and then she didn't know how to be one.
Right.
And I really feel that that's it. Am I on the right track there?
Yes, it is. She said, well, at one point, she says she and Grace are having a conversation, and Grace says, "Why don't we call you mommy?" And she says, "I don't answer to that." Um, and then she said, "Well, what did you call your mommy?" And she says, "I didn't have a mommy." And Grace says, "I thought everybody had to have a mommy." And she said, "Mine was 2 years. I was two when my mom went into a hospital, and I never saw her again." Um, she knows she's the mother of these children. But
Yes.
the other thing is, she says she has a line in the book too that everybody calls her Lila. The
Hmm.
porter calls her Lila at the building. The publisher calls her Lila. The clerk at the store calls her Lila. The only people who she doesn't let call her Lila are people who insist on being called by their last names,
Right.
like professors or doctors.
Right.
And those people, she won't let them call her by a first name either.
No, they have to be, Ms. Whatever, blah,
Right.
blah, blah.
Yeah.
So Grace, who's this younger daughter, she goes, Ruth, Grace's friend, says a great line about Frances, Joe's mother, and Ruth. Frances looks backward and Lila looks forward. And some people are trusting in their memories. Lila is, I'm going this way and I'm not stopping.
Right. And the epigraph of the book is step and fit, don't look back, something may be gaining on you.
Hmm.
And she says at another point, the unexamined life is the only life worth living. And it's a denial of Socrates. And she said, well, look what happened to Socrates.
Right.
Looking backward didn't do him any good. So she just believes in going forward. And that's a big part of the book, that she is not at all introspective. She doesn't think it does you any good. And one of the things, she's not mean. She's tough, but she's not mean. But she, at one point, Grace says, "I never apologize," and she says, and he says, "I know," and he says, "Lila never," and she says, "Lila never apologized," and he says, her father says, "I know." He's lived with these women who have never said they're sorry, but try to make amends in other ways if they've been too rough. But
Too rough, too tough.
Grace is very much like her mother, or as Lila says at one point, Grace is very much like me, but I'm nothing like her.
Ah, yeah, exactly, exactly, exactly. So Grace has written this fictionalized memoir called The Last Mother. What drew you to have her character, like add that into the story? Because she's really pushing her emotions out there and everything to a very prominent person. And it's like, well, this is what they're really like. And now you see it a lot. Like you see kids come out and say things online about their parents or whatever. But this was a different time, you know?
Right. Well, she made it a novel, but of course, everybody who was reviewing knew who her mother was.
Right.
Um, and they made a big thing of it. And it's, as she says in the book, she's been struggling for years to try to figure out what happened to her grandmother, who
Right.
disappeared.
Right.
And Lila has her version, and Grace said she just never believed it. She
Yeah.
just never, ever, ever believed it. And so, in some way, she thought she was being bullied, and the whole family was being bullied a bit by Lila to see it the way she saw it.
Hmm.
Whereas Grace wanted to set up an alternative dialogue. That's really what she wanted to do, was to redefine the end of Zelda. What
Hmm.
happened to Zelda?
Yeah, what happened to Zelda? And then she's asked, "Can you go find her?"
Yeah,
That's like dying words, or "Go find her, figure it
yeah,
out for me."
yeah, figure it out. Yeah, and Grace is a reporter, and
Right.
so Lila gives her some trouble for not going and looking for the real story, but just
Yeah.
making it up.
Why did you do fiction? You should have not done fiction. You should have made it the real thing. Go
Right.
for it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it. You can do it. So Grace's older sisters are referred to as the Starbirds. Now, remind me why they're called that. Because I thought every time they get together on the phone, it's like they're reading each other's minds. I love it. And they're not twins, if I remember correctly. They're
No,
just close in age, right?
they're 11 months apart, and they were called the virtual twins. They're called Starbirds because their name are Stella and Ava, and Stella means star and Ava means bird, and so they just started calling them the Starbirds. They were very much alike, and Joe sometimes said I should have not dressed them alike. I should have sent them to different schools. He said a real mother might have known to do that, he said, but I didn't. And he admits it was easy for him. I mean, he had a very nice mother, but he had never seen himself being more
Right.
or less the mother. And they just got on, and they also are temperamentally very easygoing.
Right.
And they always had each other. So they didn't miss Lila in the same way. But yes,
No.
they are. You could probably exchange, what Stella says, Ava could say, and what Ava says, Stella could say. They were meant to be like that. And there are people like that. Sisters who are actually twins are always fighting in some way
Hmm.
different.
Hmm.
They didn't have that struggle. They were different. They were a year apart in school. Um, but still,
That
everybody,
connection. I love when they come on and at one point they've done some investigation and one says something and something says that. And you just feel like they're reading each other's minds. You
right.
absolutely feel that way.
Or Grace says at one point, Stella says something characterizing something and positively, and Ava does it negatively. And she says, it's funny how they can say the same thing so differently.
It's like
Right?
the same story, but wait a second, that was happy, that was sad. Like, how did you
Right,
do that?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Grace's friend Ruth, who doesn't know her father, and the same goes back generations in her family.
Right.
So Grace feels like she doesn't know her mother, and Ruth is like, I don't know my father, but I'm not looking either. Like, I'm like, what's this going on? I feel that's one way they bond, is that they've got this loss in their life of knowing what it's like to be without a parent. Am I on track there where like they came
Yes, you
together?
are. I mean, they talk about it. I don't know where at one point Ruth says to her, you looked out with your dad, and I looked out with my mom and gran.
Hmm.
Really, her grandmother is more her mother than her own mother. Circumstantially, her mother was 16 when she was born, and so her grandmother more or less raised her. Um, and her grandmother was 16 when the mother was born. And she says at some point that by the time Ruth came, she said, I was finally old enough to be a mother myself. So,
It was
yes, I
like,
think
I'm 32, I can do it now. I can
yeah,
do it now.
yeah.
I have a favorite character. Did you have one that you particularly enjoyed writing?
Oh, I do wind up loving Frances. I think she's really quite remarkable. Uh, and this is the grandmother. This is his Joe, the husband's mother. I really deliver, but I think I can't help loving Lila best.
Yeah, that's me. That's me. It's
I
Lila
mean,
because
there's something about I don't know. I'm working on another book, and I just don't know what I can do after Lila. I've got to figure it out, but it's very hard. Lila
Lila
is
was singular. Lila was singular in her way of thinking and everything. So as a result, she was a character that I really liked because I kind of knew what she was going to do. Like if she walked in the room, I feel like I would know what kind of a conversation we were going to have. She's so direct. And everybody else is sort of skating around things, and she is boring right in. And as back in journalism land, there were people that would go in and go for the jugular on the story. I remember, Tina Brown of Vanity Fair said the cover has got to look like a poster that someone would want to hang. And that is what's going to draw people in. I mean, I remember lines like that people said. but also how they would do a story, like how they would write. Like yesterday, she was writing about the Menendez brothers, and it was just very interesting to see on her Substack where she was going in, like she was the journalist we knew years ago.
Right.
And it's like, okay, there's a voice, there's a tone and an attitude to it that often is missing these days.
No, no, and I don't think of Tina Brown as being very inward looking either. No,
No.
and so it's easier to be direct. And also, Lila, having grown up with her father, is basically unafraid.
The
Right,
worst has happened already.
right. She really figured out that that was it,
Right.
and that you know that
But I also feel like her father got her ready to be in the boys' club because her father was so tough that she was made herself tough enough to go in to a business that is really male driven in a lot of ways. And at the time she was writing, at the
yeah,
time she was, vying for jobs and vying to be in the room, whether it was the White House or any place else. It was a guy's world.
right. And she always wanted the top job.
hmm Yeah, nothing in between.
Nothing, she always wanted the top job, and also she wanted the kind of jobs where you could go after the top guy. She
Yeah.
always liked that, she wanted to pursue those stories. She wanted to be a sports editor at one point to go after the soccer head and the head of NCAA.
Uh-huh.
Also these are all my fantasies, groups of, people I would like to see
Yeah.
exposed, right?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting in today's world. Like, let's just go to pop culture and what's coming out with P. Diddy. I mean, like, what's coming out of all these people? You realize how far-reaching this one, like, arrest could go into a business because there was never one person in the room. There were many people in the room. And it's that moment where you see one thing happening, but you know it could explode like this at any second. And it's not yet, but it's like when.
Yeah, I know it's been really and everybody sort of people who were very young when this happened, like Justin Bieber or Ashton Kutcher. I mean, they are, they're sort of. It was probably terrifying for them. I mean, it was thrilling to be taken up by Diddy,
Yep.
but terrifying too. I really feel bad for the youngest ones,
Well, we used to,
and the women, all the women. Ugh.
when we had a parking garage on 56th Street, and it was right around the corner from Universal. And they had a sign that I've never seen in any other parking garage: turn off your radio when you pull in. And there was a group of rappers and musicians who would drive in, leave their cars running with the radio on, or turn them off, but the radio could still play and loud, like really, really loud. So I've never been in a parking garage like that before. And there were four cars. They were like beach cars, things you take out to the beach, right? Jeeps. And I said, like, whose cars are those? And they go, oh, those are P. Diddy's. Oh, these are so and so's. And I recognized no one, of course. Like it could be somebody in the garage and I would just be chatting with them, no clue whatsoever. But it was everybody who was coming into the place there. And I found it very, very interesting because it's like, oh, like this is what's happening. Don't turn off your radio. I've never seen it ever again.
No,
Never.
I haven't. I've never seen it. My
So
garage
funny.
is on the Upper West Side.
Yeah, the Upper West Side. Yeah, it's like, don't worry about that. So, do you have the whole book planned in advance? Did you know you
No.
were walking through it?
There was a comment somewhere in Goodreads when they were talking about a book, and they said, I don't know, I didn't like it. It seems as though, she made it up as she went along. And I was thinking, well, that's pretty much what we do when we're writing fiction. And this book, more than any other, was made up as I went along. And the my editor, I have a wonderful editor, Whitney Frick. She read when I got her. She read the first part. She read Lila, and just gave me a couple, two, three things, like a good teacher, just gave you two or three things to think about it. And then I had a very good friend of mine who was a professor at Columbia, an English professor, and she read the first part too, and she just made one suggestion, which was absolutely right, which I followed. I was very lucky in those two people,
Yeah.
especially, because very good readers and knew how to say things to me. And then, but then I would just keep going and making it up as I went along. And that's what that when I sat down, I never really knew what I was going to write about. But I often, after I finished a chapter, I would often leave off writing for about 10 days,
Hmm.
and I'd let the back of my mind work on it so that when I went back to it, there was something there. And I don't know why, but I trust my mind will lead me in a decent direction. Now it's led me in some, down some rabbit holes that I couldn't get. And, I've started books like everybody that just didn't go anywhere.
Right.
And the one I'm working on now is going to have to go serious revision, or starting over. But I never know exactly where I'm going. And this book, The Mystery of Zelda, I knew was very early that was needed some kind of resolution. Um, but I didn't, and I knew I'm not giving away anything. I knew Lila would die because she dies in the first sentence of the
Right.
book.
Right.
And and so that shaped it too. That would have to shape. There were things that happened in that first chapter that shaped the book. And the thing is, when you first sit down to write, the whole world is there for you to use. And by the time you finish the first page, it started to shrink. You
Right.
can't suddenly turn somebody who's married into somebody who's a stripper and never married. I mean, there's just a newspaper. You can't. All kinds of things professions have been ruled out, cities have been ruled out. And and so as you get to the end, you're working you're working in a much narrower place than when
Hmm.
you were in the beginning. So that even if you haven't got it planned out, there's you can't do something really, really different. It has to
Hmm.
be organic.
Yeah. They can't all of a sudden say, oh, this is what my career is, or I'm going to become a great mother. And I really love Lila's line, don't any of you die before me. Like she completely says, like she couldn't handle it after her brother died. She couldn't handle what was going on. And it's like anybody close to me, and it's almost like I've been left already, like when I was young, and I'm not going to be left again. It's not going to happen to me.
Right,
And when she exits stage right, okay, but she leaves a history there that everybody
right,
still is unraveling.
right. Yeah.
So it's like she's still there in a lot of ways.
Oh, I don't know about you, and I had a very vivid mother. And I always think of my mother more as a person than a mother. I mean, she was a very responsible person, and she loved us in her way. She wasn't, she was an Italian, but she wasn't soft and cuddly Italian.
Hmm.
Um, but she was very smart, very funny, and my friends all loved her. And she was more like she was a person. I always think of her now as a person, but she's in my head all the time because she was much more influential than any regular person could be. But
Yeah.
her voice is always in my head, and I think not a day goes by I don't think of one parent or another,
Hmm.
and trying to rewrite. I often say that you bury your parents twice: the first time when you put them in the ground, and the second time when you say they're never going to change.
Hmm. Exactly.
Too late for that. The only person who can change is you.
Hmm. Very,
So,
very much so.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And but you do think about them every day as you're doing something or whatever. And me as a mother, I'm always wondering, what's my influence on my two boys? Like, how do they actually see me? I mean, for when they were young, I wasn't around a lot because I'd started this company. I was in the city a lot, blah, blah, blah. And I said to them one time, like, how do you feel about the fact that I wasn't home for dinner every night? Your father was. Your father was always around. Same like Joe, he was always around. And I said to him, like, how'd you feel? And the younger one says, well, we got to see like the Harry Potter thing early, and you always brought us books. And it's funny because they were at the last Harry Potter, like, the night the book came out, and they were the first children to get the book. My friend Annie was at Borders and she was doing PR and she had them up front. And afterwards, they were asked to do media with MTV and all these places. So I am now prepping them in sound bites of what they can say as they go along. They're going down. I can't remember their ages, but one was, I think, in middle school. And he goes down the line at the end and he goes, is there any more media? Is there any more to be done? And I just thought it was this great moment. So when he thinks back, they think about the experiences that were afforded them. And I thought that was really interesting. And they had all the books they wanted.
Yeah.
So it's funny. But you really don't know what they think. I mean, they're not going to tell you.
No, no. That not, if you have a teenage daughter, you have an idea.
Yeah.
briefly, for a period of time what they think. But and my daughter is still pretty outspoken. My son is very he's a real stoic, real stoic. So I don't get that, but but my daughter is much clearer about when we fall down and when we don't. I mean, she's been an enormous supporter of my writing. With the first book I wrote, she was the number one person with encouraging me, reading it, and she's a novelist herself, and so she knew the kinds of things that I mean, you have to think that I wanted to sell my book,
Right.
and I asked a friend of hers because Maggie had read it a million times after my first book to read it. She was a novelist and she was working at a publishing house. You don't have to do any criticism or anything. I just want you to tell me if you think some publishing house might publish it.
Right.
And that's the only reading I wanted for it. I didn't want to impose any burden on her. But so that it's interesting having a child who's a kind of colleague in a way.
Yes. Yeah. 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 My older son worked with me till last year,
Really?
and he went to Fordham and Lincoln Center and came to the office in the afternoons. And he shaped a lot of things that we did just because he knew how to do them. He had ways of figuring it out. It was great. But you're right, when somebody's got in your world, it's really terrific.
Yeah.
You can get feedback, positive and negative. They can
Right.
tell you you're doing something wrong, and it's okay because you're guided the right way on doing it. So now you've got part of the book taking place in Michigan. So what drew you to have, well, that fabulous home called Tara? I'm going to go to Tara. Okay, I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm going to Tara.
Um, I, I, Detroit was an interesting city, and I thought it was a city that had gone through rough times about when Lila was a child, and I thought it was the right background for her to come from.
Hmm.
And then, of course, I did, as one always does, I consulted Professor Google, and I did research, and I discovered, neighborhoods, and I discovered restaurants, but one of the things and streets where to live, and put her father, as a GM worker, um, and so it seemed the right place for her to leave.
Hmm.
But also Michigan, going to the University of Michigan, which is a first-rate university, becomes the means for her. So I felt that the city really worked.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't want to use New York. My second book was very New York based, and my first book I made up the town together. It was sort of New Haven-ish, but wasn't New Haven. Um, and I just thought, find out about another city. I mean, one
Yeah.
of the things you do when you're writing a book and it's difficult, you say, time to do research. And you go,
Let's research for 5 days.
yeah,
Let's just see if we can learn
let's go
more, you know?
see where we can have Lila's memorial service, what, what burial ground should I put her in? I mean, things like that.
Is going to be at Frank Campbell's, or where's we're going to go? Where are we going to go? Because we know what that is and we know how that's going to go. But are we
Right.
going to do something different? How is it going to happen? It's
Yeah.
really funny because there's some places that you actually know and you're like, I could write about that completely. Chris Whitaker's new book, All the Colors of the Dark. Chris hasn't been to those places, just as he hadn't been to the places of their book. And I said, where your book ends up, I've spent a lot of time at, and I think you might enjoy it. And he was laughing. I said, I think you should go there at some point. But there are times where I was reading it and I was like, oh yeah, he's calling Breckenridge Breck. Yeah, he read the travel brochure. He's got it. And he
Right.
admits he wasn't to the places. He admits that not there.
I have a good friend who grew up in Detroit and went to the University of Michigan, and he said to me, "How did you know that? How did you know to do that? How did you do?" I said, I said, without the internet, I don't know that I could have done it. I mean, it's really one
When
of the benefits.
you think about it, we used to go to atlases. Remember they used to have the phone books at the library for all these different cities, and you go in and you could look it up. And I'm like, what were we doing? I mean, it was seems so archaic of the way you would get information. And now there's just too much information because you got to sift through all day long. It's
Right. Right. No, and I also think, I mean, what I think kids lose is the serendipity. In college, for instance, and I'm very old. I would go into the stacks and sit on you'd pull down the book you were looking for, then you'd pull down the book next to it. And it was, I believe in serendipity. And I think to be a novelist, you need a kind of serendipitous mind.
Right. Right. Everything can't be just this is the way it's planned, this is this and
Right,
that.
right.
Life doesn't happen like that. Life doesn't happen that you follow a straight path. I mean, look, if anybody told me that I was going to leave a corporate job and go do something, and that was not entrepreneurial in our family. That was not. My dad was with the newspaper for some crazy amount of years. No, you didn't do that.
Yeah. And
So,
I could never do that. I My daughter had a bookshop in Brooklyn, a children's bookshop, which closed during COVID
okay.
because you can't have a children's bookstore if people don't come, and they had labs too, and that was really hard on her. And my daughter-in-law is an interior designer, but and has a shop, but she had been working at Christie's doing art promotion, head of art promotion. She did the same, and I just admire these two young women who have done I could never do. I needed a job that had a 401k and had
Oh yeah,
insurance.
yeah.
I think it's magnificent that you did that. I really do. I could never have done that.
There are times of sitting there like, I look back, it's 28 years now. We started on AOL. So I'm sitting there thinking, what has happened through the years? I mean, we had the first ever interview with John Grisham. It was typed, okay? There was no, we
That's
started,
good.
it was really funny as we were going to do videos in Barnes and Noble bookstores. That's how this whole thing got started. We thought videos of interviews with authors like this would
Right,
have people entertained in the store. You could put it up in all the stores. You could have it the register, what's coming out in the next couple of weeks as people are checking out. We had this whole model. And we went in and we asked, and they said, well, what do you think? And I said, what color is the TV? Who's going to turn it on and turn it off? What will happen if the VHS tape breaks? And I'm like, oh, these people, the big concept is beyond where we are. And we walked out and it was like a really great idea, but it was way out of the ballpark. And but it teaches you something too, because
huh,
even all the characters here, you can do just so much. And then you get like, I can't do anymore. I've got to go do something else to get to the
right,
next point. And which brings me to the use of DNA and genealogy, this couldn't have happened in this book 20 years ago. This couldn't have happened. And what you can find out, and I have to tell you, you made me want to go take one of those tests and just,
really. I
yeah,
would. I don't want to find. The interesting things about genealogy is that they find out a lot of people aren't the child of whom they thought they were.
yeah,
The most disturbing thing was I recently read that they have been discovering that there's much more incest
wow,
than people thought. Uh, I mean, your mother. I guess if you have, IV with somebody else's egg, IVF with somebody else's egg, your mother might not be your mother, even though you might have photographs of her when
right.
she was. There was a time when maternity was never in question, um, but paternity could be, and I think that's why they locked up the women. But um, but now it's all a crapshoot. You don't know who anybody is, and
No, it's really interesting. My grandfather, I think I've talked on the show before about this. My grandfather is the only one who left Italy in his family. Everyone else is still there.
my
They live in the
grandfather
same
too.
village, same village.
Right,
He's the only one who came.
right.
And they have apartments in Rome. Like everyone, like it's not like, it's poverty land or anything like that. And my mother went to Italy and I said to her, so did you ask why he left? And she said, no. So now we are going to go as a family at some point and go ask the questions in the village that nobody else asked before,
Right.
because how did everyone else stay and one person went to America and they didn't go back? And I think that the genealogy and figuring out, my son does a lot, my older son does a lot of research on which ship they came over on, who was a stowaway, he's figured out, because they're nowhere, there's no record. And there are a lot of people who stowed away coming over. It's very, very interesting. But we weren't able to do that. Writers weren't able to do that. We weren't able to find these facts. And I feel like since the last, like, let's say 40 years, things have accelerated so quickly. Even the last 20 years, it's gone like this, that you couldn't have written these things years ago. And
Right,
how would you have found the mother years ago? What would you have done?
right, right. And they they confirmed it, of course, but there's a lot of, what you're going to do is, genealogy is very important in finding, and whether you decide to do it. I mean, Ruth doesn't want to find her dad and says, beware answered prayers. You don't want
Yes.
to. She knew what
Yeah.
the possibilities were too.
Yeah, the possibilities. And if you didn't know it for 3 generations, well, what are you going to do? Track back each one to figure out what's going on? It's just the way you wove it into the story, I thought was so interesting because now all of a sudden it's like, bang, like who are these people? And especially when the Starbirds are on the phone as well and getting involved in the whole thing. And they're in California and they've done all their research because she knows she needs them. I mean,
Right,
she's at the point where Grace can't figure this out herself. She's got to go, hey, get on the phone, let's figure this out.
right.
What can you
It takes her
do?
a while to ask. She doesn't like to ask.
No.
That's why Lila likes to be the boss because she can just tell.
Yes, that's right. And there's a lot more of telling going on in the book, even at the end. And I'm not going to spoil what the end is. There's telling at that point again. It's telling this is, and it's not asking back like what happened. It's telling this is the way. And you see a lot of what happens in the rest of the book based on part 3. Is
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
is that right? Yeah. We're not giving anything away, folks. So did you write the chapter titles as you went, or did you go back for those?
I had them and then I revised them and yeah, and I wanted to keep them short. I was trying to do just when I was revising them and just I wanted to do just one
One word.
word, but
Yeah.
that was not possible for some of them.
Yeah.
So, but I just felt simply also because of my storytelling is kind of jagged, going backward and forth, and that that it might be good to give them a little guidance. And one of the things my editor told me, she said, you can move around, but my advice to you is to where you started the chapter, end the chapter.
Okay.
And so I did work to do that so that somehow that chapter had a kind of wholeness to it. And
That's
so
right.
I thought that was incredibly, this is when you have a gifted editor, you're so lucky.
But do you know what's really interesting? I would love to at some point take a workbook that the chapters have been titles have been thought through and just put
Yeah,
the chapter titles on a page and just look back at the story and see if the story is there just
right,
looking at. I think it'd be a fun exercise if you're in a book group. Anybody who was listening today
right.
who's in a book group, think about taking that and exploring the book differently because in book club discussions you talk about the character, da 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 da. Let's talk about the writing of the book, like how it came to be. And if you look at these chapter titles and just read them aloud, do you have the story of the book there?
And I know people who map out everything.
Mhm.
Now my first book is about a divorce, and it starts with filing papers and it ends with a divorce. I mean, that has a built-in structure, a
Sure.
divorce. The second one is a story of a man who dies. I'm always killing people off in the first paragraph. He dies, and then after his death, a woman comes forward and said she had 2 sons with him.
Mm.
And so that story is about the family and are these 2 sons his sons? And so that had a built-in structure too.
Yeah.
This one did not.
No, it didn't. And I'm going to look at the chapter titles and just say like what I like, learn, blah, blah, blah. So you came to writing fiction later in life. Did you just hit a moment where I got this divorce story I want to tell, or what happened?
Well, I was a dean at Yale and on one of the residential colleges, and it was a wonderful job. And I had been teaching, and I liked that. And I just thought I needed to be doing something else. And so I had this idea of an epistolary novel. And I just thought I'll do it. And
Hmm.
I just started doing it. I always, I mean, I'd always been doing journalism on the side. So it didn't seem so far. And then I just kept going with it. It took forever, though. I mean, the book starts in 1999 and sort of lasted because that's when I started writing it. And
Hmm.
it came out in 2013.
Right.
Um, so I mean it came. I was single then, and I started writing it, and then I moved to New York 3 years later, and stopped writing it for a couple of years,
Hmm.
and I got married and had a new job, and my husband finally said to me, "Well, are you a writer or not?"
Oh,
That was that was
That's a challenge.
love, little tough love from the husband.
Yeah.
And so I said okay, and I hit it, and then I finished it about I had a big job in New York, so I finished it about 2010, something like that, 29, and then getting an agent, selling it, all that kind of stuff. It just takes.
It takes a long time, and that's the first book. But I do love that you're happily married to the second husband. You're writing the book about the divorce papers. That's really good. He's
Well, yeah,
telling you, what are you going to write a book? Well, I'm going to write a book about divorce papers. Okay, wait. Well, I wouldn't think you're going in that
yeah,
direction.
I mean that happens twice in the book too, where people are talking about, um, on the first date they start talking about breakups.
Yes,
Right? And
we're ready for it. We're ready
right,
for it.
and,
I
one
saw
other.
I saw something the other day which I can either believe or not believe because it is the internet. How people used to meet people. There's this little, I guess it's a meme or something that's going around, and how people met in 1934 and how they meet now. And most people meet online. That's where our through friends. That's the top. Whereas before it was like this. There was no internet, of course. And it's interesting to see that that's how people are finding people. And
God, it's one of my stepsons, and married just last year.
right.
They're both incredibly well suited for each other.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a very good thing. They met online. Um, David and I were fixed up, and the woman who fixed up my son and his wife too. But as far as we know, she's only very good with us.
Like it with you. She's not out there doing like,
She
she's
hasn't
not
done.
going to be the matchmaker on Netflix. She's not going to
No,
be doing that.
and I met my first husband at work,
Mhm.
and my daughter met her husband in school at Columbia. I mean, it's like work, and that's I feel bad about people who don't go to work these days. I mean, meeting online may be thing, but it's nice to meet somebody at work the same way
Mhm.
you dated somebody whom you knew at school, because oftentimes you're a friend before
Right.
they become your romantic partner. And I also think you really ought to like the person as well as love the person.
Right.
And
I mean, I'm at an age that I love being remote. I love it because I save so much time coming into the city, so much time. And having an office and thinking about, the water in the office and all this kind of stuff is gone. Like, psh. People said you're doing so much more. And I go, yeah, because I'm not worried about the water and the electricity and all the other things you have to think about.
right,
And, but the camaraderie, the people that I've met, I mean, my closest friend is somebody I met the first day I worked at Mademoiselle, and that's the harbor of your secrets and knows everything about you. And there's that, and then there's you don't have those same kind of things just hanging out.
right.
It's
No,
completely different.
no. And I also, I mean, if I had small children, I just,
Huh.
I mean, I did sometimes work at home and things like that, but I loved going to work.
Yeah.
I,
And you know what? We also got dressed up. There was a moment that we sound really old fashioned here, but we were in the city for a meeting. I think it was the morning I went in and I was meeting you. And I looked on the street and no one was dressed up. Like no one. And you're sitting there like, have we all become people who just wear leisure wear all day long? And then you saw a guy in a suit with the tie, and you feel like you're in some retrospective
right,
time of what was going on. I'm like, wow, he must be. And seeing him, you thought he was running the company because of the way he was dressed.
right.
And I found that really interesting because now you have no idea. Like people have like, two outfits they could possibly wear when they go places. But if you really look around on the street and you're in Midtown in the morning and you're just there like, these people are going to work, right? And it sounds terrible of me to be, judgmental, but hey, I spent 17 years of fashion magazine, shoot me.
Right, yeah. No, that's why I wore my red dress because I wanted to stand out.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's like this is what you want to do. This is what you want to do. Okay, so your editor sees your book kind of early to give some little shape to it. How about your agent? Same time, earlier,
Yeah, she reads it all the way along the way, and
all the way along the line.
she's a wonderful reader too. And yeah, I'm incredibly lucky
Yeah. So
on
was
that.
this always the title? Because it's perfect.
No,
No, really.
no, we had terrible trouble with it. I wanted to call it Mother Hoodlum,
Oh,
and they said I couldn't do that. So we went for weeks trying to figure out what it should be.
yeah.
And then Wit plucked a line from the book. I mean, she found it, and
Yeah.
that was great. And I was glad that it was a line in the book, so I felt that I had contributed something to it. But yeah, no, she did. I mean,
Great.
and once she said like mother,
It's right there.
we knew we were home, right?
And the cover is great. I mean, the
Yeah,
cover is just, it stands out.
yeah,
You're just sitting looking at it. And, you've got these paintings. It's also because it's not a photograph. It's like how they imagine each other. It's almost like they painted each other of the way they think each other look and feel.
right,
And is it really? We're not quite sure.
right. It reflects the coolness between them,
Yes.
you know. And
Nobody's looking at each other. Nobody's smiling. Nobody's,
no, and that was that took a lot of work to find the right cover.
I want to do an evening event. We do evening events with readers, and I want to do one on covers. And I keep saying that. I've been saying it for 2 years because I don't know how to find cover designers, but I'm going to make that my, because I think the covers and the way covers are developed is so interesting and to show along the way where it goes and where the treatments are, type, the way the type is here, the way your name is here, a novel here.
The designer, the dial designer who pulled it all, who found, who worked on finding that drawing and that painting and then everything. I love the way the print isn't. You can see it sharply, but it's a little ragged around the
Yes.
edges, which I like a lot.
Yeah.
And no, so she's a wonderful designer.
Yes. And you know what? If you do this, it's like other. Okay, if you do that. And I was thinking, I just looked at this as I was like, is the
Right,
light's going wrong? But it's like other. And it's
right,
like mother, because it is the other person in
right.
both ways.
I didn't think of that.
So
More
Rebecca,
depth.
it's like I'm looking at your book. Rebecca Loman narrates the audio. Have you been able to hear her
I
yet?
haven't heard it yet. I just am going to send and said, could I hear it? I
Yeah,
mean,
I
I
think
was
it,
given voices to listen to, and I really thought she was a wonderful reader. So
and it's interesting because she's got to portray like the older woman and the strength of Lila and the intrepidness of Grace, if I could say that, and where she's going to come, blah blah blah. So now, of course, because you can't just write a book anymore. You have to have a film deal. Like, I mean, come on. So last week, I mean, everybody's like, is there going to be a movie? Does that mean you don't want to read the book, or did you like the book so much you want to see what they do with it? Like, I'm kind of curious here. So there's film news. So what were you up with the film?
oh yeah, my oldest friend had said after she read it, before, and she said, you should get a movie deal. I said, well, that's not something I do. I don't go out and get movie deals. Um, it was I think it started with the relationship between my editor, between Wit, and Jordan Moblow at Universal. She sent him the book,
Mhm.
and he did it, and then he lined up people, and they and uh, my agent has my agent has an agent at
Yeah.
CAA, and he did all the negotiations, uh, and and then I had a movie deal before, it was like a preamp almost,
Right. It was. It
yeah,
was. I sat there and read that and I was like, wow. I mean, I wrote the people over the publisher real quickly and I said, this is fantastic news. And when it's timed around the time the book is coming out or right before, it's nice. It
right,
gives it a little bit of like, it gives you more ink, as we would say in journalism world,
right,
right?
that's right, yeah, right,
How you and I would speak about it.
right, right, yeah.
So you're working on something now? Do you have a time frame of when we may see that, or is it, Carol,
Well,
I'm just writing.
the older I get, the faster I think I have to go. You want to get the, but I really feel that, first of all, I published my first book when I was 67. Um, and I, I, I'm so lucky to still have work. I
Hmm.
don't do well without work.
Hmm. Hmm.
I've worked, my whole life, and the few times I've been sort of between jobs or for different reasons, it hasn't been good for me. So
Hmm.
um, I just hope I can keep going as long as I can keep going.
Hmm.
Um, and I love the crew. I mean, between my agent, my editor, and my friends who read, I feel very, and the people who read my book. My daughter's a novelist, but and my friend Jean is an English professor, but I don't have other novelists read
Hmm.
my books. And I feel that's lucky. I have readers. smart readers reading my book.
Mm-hmm.
And
And I think that matters a lot because what you're trying to do is not talk to people who may say what you want to hear, but people who say what needs to be done or what needs to happen. Or, you know what, we could talk about this with a book group and it would totally work. And this is where we could go and things like that. And I agree, people who are readers, it's more than just big mouths that are out there right now. It's people who actually take a deep look inside, a deep dive inside a book. They can help make it, can help, just by sitting there and talking about it because they're so entrenched with it.
right, no, no, and all of my all with Kathy and Jean and my friend Joanna. I mean, Joanna said that the book had more political stuff in it, and she
Mm-hmm.
said it's good what you have, but it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
and she is
It's
the best reader I know. She can read anything.
it's interesting because on the site we talked no politics whatsoever. People said I have no idea, and I said that's fine. Not supposed to know. In fact, I heard a really good line from Paul Simon, who's really one of my favorite. He is my favorite writer, and he sat there and he says, "I am a liberal Democrat who writes books for all, writes songs for all people." So my opinion doesn't really matter. It's mine. It doesn't need to be. And to see somebody not doing something in a particular climate right now, not going out, you are for all people. And I always sit there on the site and I said, mine don't matter. It doesn't really matter. I'll tell you to
No,
go vote next week. I'll go tell you to do that. That's in every newsletter, every 2 years. I'm like, go do that. No, it doesn't have to come on the page.
no,
And I feel that there's a safety factor at this point because everybody knows that's not going to be there. Like it's the one thing you're not going to talk about. And it can estrange readers if they're reading something and they feel they do not believe that, they will turn and they can turn
right.
on page 94 if that's where you've got it. And it's an interesting time for that reason. So I see why your friend said that. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what you do next. I really
Oh,
am.
thank you.
So,
Thank you.
crank it up a little bit, crank it up a little bit.
Okay,
If you
okay.
need another reader, send it my way. Send it my way. I'll sit there and say, yes, I think we can keep moving chapter titles, please. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the book. I think that readers are really going to have fun with it. I think
Oh,
because it's different. It's different from what is out there right now. And I think that that's what's kind of thing what people are looking for because we've got this mystery in it, but we've got motherhood, we've got daughterhood, and everything else in between.
right.
So congratulations, and I wish
Thank
you
you
all
so
the
much.
best luck.
Oh, thanks so much.
And to everybody else, thanks a lot for joining us. We'll see you next time on Book Reporter Talks to.